We created rules for a haunted house that shouldn't exist. Now, as adults, we found a house matching its description. Part 4, the second floor. We were on the stairs, going up. The curvature of the stairs reminded me of the curled up head of the entity I'd seen up close downstairs. A head had uncurled itself as a body and then stood up on the larger body walking beneath it. I couldn't get my own head around those entities that had come out on the first floor while we had been trying to solve the first puzzle. They'd come for us because Patrick had broken house rule number 3 about depositing electronics in the cubbyhole near the entrance. The entity's appearance has been difficult for me to navigate mentally. I'm afraid that difficulty has influenced how I try to put words to them. How do you describe something that has little relation to things you've seen before? Without the powers of comparison that we ordinarily have, I felt lost. If one of the 4 or 5 of us had designed those entities, I didn't know where the ideas had come from. Maybe they'd been born from some of Greg's bizarre little doodles, and maybe he'd been running a high fever then. Maybe we'd forgotten about those particular details. To try again, what I'd seen was at least 2 separate things, separate entities maybe, fused together. A body and a face or head that was its own body with its own limbs. They were clothed in whitish fuzzy robes. Well, the larger lower body was. The limbs of the larger body in particular were off, angled like a toy whose arms and legs had been snatched out by a child and then put back in the wrong way. And then there was that walking they had that was rhythmic but broken. A staccato little dance step walk that got under your skin, like a bad waltz, like strange toes stomping on your feet. Waltzes and the entities pulled me over into a lane of thinking I was trying to avoid while on the stairs. Walt. I don't see Walt the Stairman, I said. That's a relief. The entities probably only appear when we've been bad, Jennifer said. When we break a rule, as long as cue Walt the Stairman, the rest of what Jennifer said was lost to the napalm of fear in my brain. I glimpsed an image of a large shape above the stairs, hanging there. It had much longer limbs than I thought those other entities had. Its limbs were touching the walls, holding it up. It made an arc above our heads. Rounder eyes than normal looked down upon me. A hint of blur at its edges. Then it was gone. You guys see that? I said. My breath was coming out ragged. I was sure that at any moment I might throw up. Didn't want to do it on the stairs because that might add an unnecessary slipping hazard. Save that for later. We were at the second floor landing by then, so we stopped to discuss it. They told me they hadn't seen the entity dangling above us, Walt the Stairman. The entity whose job, according to the rules we'd made when children, was to watch over the stairs so that people didn't go up before solving the floor puzzle. Was Walt making a point? Or was what I'd seen a trick in my mind? Was it both? But the longer we were at the second floor landing, the more we knew we had to get started. Not on the puzzle, that would come later, but too soon for comfort. First, we had to face what we knew would be a potentially dangerous floor. As kids, we designed the first floor as a warm-up, scary, but not dangerous. At least not until you got to that puzzle. Unless you tried to solve the first puzzle or broke one of the rules, you wouldn't be risking anything down there. Not so with the second floor. I was the one who stepped first into the second floor vestibule. Click. Onto a pressure plate. Shoot, I said. The traps. A hand grabbed my shoulder from behind me. It's all right, Greg said. That's just to get whoever's going through the house ready for the other traps, remember? I do, Jennifer said. The first trap we made comes after this. Okay, I said. Sure, I recall it, but it's a little hazy. To my right, motion. There was an old record player on the stand against the wall, just like we had put into our sketchbook designs years ago. It had a big, gaudy horn on it. It's the kind of record player that I believe is called a phonograph. The record was spinning. Its needle apparatus was moving. When the needle dropped onto the record, it played us a 1910s or 1920s ragtime number. At that point, the needle rose and fell again. Too hard, I thought. The song went in reverse. I was reminded of that sound I'd heard at the front doorway before going into the house, with our eyes closed and our hands covering them, as the rules had instructed, when we'd been waiting for whatever had opened the door for us to move away. When the song began playing again, the voice was in a much deeper, almost demonic tone. It got garbled, went into some lines about melody, and then stopped playing altogether. By that time, I had moved well off that pressure plate, and the others were standing with me in the vestibule. My heart was hammering in my chest. That's not the same song, I said. It's not the one we decided should be played when someone steps on the plate. Yeah, Jennifer said, which is kind of ironic considering the lyrics. I don't remember what the other song was, Patrick said. It was old too, something about a person driving someone else crazy. I don't remember it either, Greg said. But it wasn't this, Patrick said. The vestibule also had paintings of flowers in various states of decay. That was right. That was the way it should be, the way we had intended. What was also right were the two doors at the end of the little entry hall to the second floor. We walked over to them, a door with a hook and a door with a fish on their fronts. And here's the first trap, Jennifer said. It's the... which door is it again? This is me, Patrick said. We're the fish, so we go through the fish door. I remember it because it was my idea. No, Greg said as we were moving in that direction. It's the hook. We changed that, remember? In order to beat this house, you have to be a hook, not a fish. I took a deep breath. Are you sure, Greg? No, I'm right, Patrick said. I'm sure. We didn't change that. That was mine. I would know. Greg and Patrick were having a staring contest. We're the fish, Patrick said to him. Greg shook his head. You better be sure than I am, and I don't think you are. I was already moving towards the door with the fish on it. I kind of just wanted to end their argument. Besides that, I had a plan. I'd just have the others stand far back, and I'd hide myself behind and to the side of the door as I pulled it open, thus evading the trap if it was the wrong door. So I grabbed the handle of Patrick's fish door. All right, everybody, I said. Stand back. Get closer to the stairs. I'll just move aside and backwards as I open the door. After they'd reluctantly moved away, I yanked open Patrick's fish door. I got to the side as I'd said I would, and I braced myself. Nothing happened. Are we good? I said. I was relying on my friend's better vantage point into the doorway from farther back. The others gave me the all clear, so I went around the side of the door, peered into the next room myself. It was a second-story drawing room for entertaining guests, just as we'd planned. Then I turned around to face them. Success, I said. Greg was nearly on top of me already with the speed walk of his. He raised an arm, and I was going to get slugged, but not sure why. Instead, he grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me back. The thwang of a large spring and a whoosh of air chased after me. Then I was on the ground, scooting away on my backside as shards of filthy glass fell onto my jeans. Standing above me was a mannequin dressed like a butler. Refreshments, it said in a recorded voice. It was carrying a tray full of grimy shards of glass. If I hadn't have gotten out of the way, some of them might have cut me up. We'd planned on that butler coming out of the wrong door to the drawing room. It was a spring-loaded mannequin bearing painful and potentially devastating little treats for the unfortunate person who opened the wrong door. I had opened that door. "Thanks, Greg," I said. I shook pieces of glass off me as I stood up. "I really owe you one." I couldn't meet Patrick's eyes. Didn't know what to say to him. I felt bad for him. I was just appreciative that I wasn't having to worry about bleeding or infection. "That thing must have come around the corner," I said. "Did we intend it that way?" No one answered the question, but they were happy I was all right. We passed into the drawing room and from there, a study. There were some pretty unsettling things in those rooms. I don't know how we devised a lot of that stuff as kids, where it came from. Keeping with the mannequin theme, in both the drawing room and study were a bunch of mannequins seated and standing in a variety of postures. Some were missing their limbs or their heads. One held another's head in its hands. A mannequin seated at a table had a book open to pages detailing an Iron Maiden, the Iron Maiden's chest cavity open and displaying its rib-like spikes, and another torture device that swung people while they were upside down. I recalled those before foreshadowing for future traps. Like I said, not sure where we'd gotten a lot of those concepts as kids. Then we were at the library. We had an idea of what to expect. Sometimes ideas aren't nearly enough to get you ready. Jennifer opened the door, and we all peeked in. We started to hold the wall. A couple of us were gripping the door like it was a branch on a cliffside. Even though we'd felt we were on level ground a moment earlier, once that door was open, our perspective changed. The wooden floor of the library sloped down at a very sharp angle. Beyond, towards the back of the room, there was a pit. It looked to be roughly 10 feet in breadth, with a width that went across the entire room. Against the black walls, massive bookshelves leaned over the pit, secured in place by things that, even with my experience in industrial and commercial building construction, I had no idea could exist, unless they had been made of metal and welded in place or secured with hidden bracing. In other words, those bookshelves and their books should have fallen into that pit. They were that big. It didn't make sense how tall this room was and how deep the pit seemed to be. The library should have been directly over the kitchen and some of the other first floor rooms, which had no indication of a pit. But we had designed this library that way as kids, so here it was. Slapping us in the face, metaphorically, was this facetious banner we had made to stretch across much of the room. It was the kind of banner you might see presenting a library's book fair. We used to love book fairs, when the library got brand new books, just released, and you had the nice smelling catalogs to get you ready for when the day or days came, and you could go into the library and pick up the cool new books you'd ordered. Anyway, instead of a book fair, the banner read, "Knowledge is slippery." We'd laughed about it then, thought we were clever. Didn't feel that way now. I mentioned earlier that we should have been better prepared. File that under the understatement category. We had no mountain climbing gear with us, which is probably what we needed to get across the steeply sloped flooring of the library and to the door on the right side of the room. Here's what we did to get across the library. We held hands, and we lowered ourselves on the angled floor, like we'd made a rope of ourselves. Greg had to shove his new sketchbook beneath his pants belt. The person or people at the front looked for things against or near the front wall of the library to grasp with their free hand. Those in the back held onto what we'd already found. We used our leg strength and the bond of our hands. We used niches or grooves in the floorboard, baseboards that tried to break off in our grip, a desk that was heavy, but not so heavy it didn't slide a little if pulled too much. We used trust. It was hard. I think it would have been easier with 5 people, with Sally. But the 4 of us made it across, from the left to the right side of the room. The pit had been dark, whispering promises, things to come, but we hadn't fallen in. After the library, we were looping back around toward the stairs. We knew that this time we had to solve the puzzle before a path would open back up to the stairway. If we wanted to go back, it would have had to have been back through the library. A hall from the library bisected 3 rooms, or chambers as we had labeled them. They were identical in size, so we couldn't remember which one had the puzzle. We opened the doors to the first 2 even though we figured the puzzle was probably in the last one. The sights in those first 2 rooms were revolting. Bones littered the floor of the first one, what looked to be real animal bones, or at least very good replicas. In the next room, the same exact bones were in the same exact positions. We checked multiple times, despite some of us gagging at the sight and smell of the second room in particular. But they had more meat on them, like time had been wound back. Flies were buzzing around the bones with meat on them, actual living flies. I knew they were alive because I swatted one to make sure it wasn't some special effect. I beheld its twitching, crumpled body in my palm. This was important. Flies might seem like a small detail, but other than the entities, this was the first time we'd encountered something in the house that might actually be alive. It would not be the last. In the final room of the hallway, we expected the second floor puzzle. Inside, in the middle of the room, was a circular staircase leading up. There was a trapdoor above it. "Huh," Patrick said. "This isn't right," I said. "There are no other stairs in the house. There shouldn't be." "We can't go up these stairs either until we've solved the puzzle," Patrick said. "Rule number 6. Walt the stairman will come for us if we climb the stairs before solving the puzzle." "Guys," Jennifer said, "this is the puzzle. We don't remember another staircase being in the house because we didn't put one in. But we also never decided on what the puzzles should be. They could be anything, including a staircase." "That's right," Greg said. "The puzzle was supposed to be in the center of one of these rooms, and voila, the center of the room." "We should brainstorm a little here," Jennifer said, "since we've got the time." She glanced up at the clocks against the walls. You could hear them ticking in unison like the marching of an army. There had to be at least a dozen of them. Looked to be half on one wall and half on the opposite. They were all plain white plastic analog clocks. "The first floor puzzle," she said, "was related to me. There were 5 of us, 5 floors, 5 puzzles. I'm guessing that each puzzle is related to one of us. So the question burning a hole through the front and back of my mind is, who here has a thing for stairs?" "Other than Walt?" Greg said, laughing harshly. We gave him sour looks. "I used to like those," Patrick began. "What are they called? Impossible staircases? You know, the ones that are represented in art and seem to go on forever. It's like they descend and go around, and then they're ascending back to where they began." "They're called Penrose stairs," Greg said. His arms were folded and he was sitting on the only bed in the room. "What? I considered myself something an artiste, before I lost my innocence to working on medical cream and potato chip advertisements. So right now," I said, "what we have is possible stairs. Maybe we gotta turn them into impossible stairs." "Let's do that," Jennifer said, "until we come up with something better." Greg looked up, still sitting on the bed. "Hey, sounds good to me. Unless we fail because it's the wrong way to go about it. Or maybe it's right. I don't know. Guess we're on our way to finding out." "All right," Patrick said. "Sounds like a decent start. Make the possible stairs impossible. Wish we had an axe or a hammer in here. Yeah, I said. We could go to work on those stairs. We searched the room for other potential clues to the second floor puzzle. There wasn't much in the room, but we had to get through. Here are all the clues we gathered. An early 20th or 19th century looking circular staircase in the middle of the room. It went up to a closed trap door. The staircase had 14 total stairs. A bed with plain white sheets and comforter. There was a shoe print on the left and right pillow, going in opposite directions. A compact extension ladder under the bed that, upon fully opening, could reach to the top step of the staircase. 14 clocks, analog clocks with the hands. 7 were on the left wall, and 7 were on the right wall. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be scuffed up as if someone had stepped on them. But the strangest thing was that the clocks on the right wall were actually running counterclockwise. That was it. Once again, I found myself amazed that as children, we had come up with clues for a puzzle that years ago we had seemed to have no inkling of. And now, here we were trying to solve it with those clues years later. At this point, we didn't have the entities moving towards us because we hadn't broken a rule. Not like the first floor puzzle. However, I think we all felt the pressure of time on our shoulders. Oppressive. Maybe it was the ticking of all those clocks, or how the stairs at the center of the room beckoned to us. Part 5. The second puzzle solution. We had been discussing the clues in the room with the second floor puzzle for a while. The clocks. The pillows with the shoe prints on them, the ladder, and the circular stairway itself. A couple times we even wandered back to the rooms with the bones and the meteor bones in them, and the flies. Did we do it for inspiration? To remind us that we also had bones that might look like that in the future? You know, I said at one point when we were all in the puzzle room, I was wrong. We already have impossible stairs in front of us. They're not Penrose stairs, but they're just as impossible because we can't climb them. Rule number 6 forbids going up the stairs without solving the floor puzzle. Patrick is right. I don't think we should even try it. Then we fold, Greg said. We just give up? That's not what I meant, I said. Maybe we're not supposed to climb them, Patrick said. If we take the clocks off the wall and put them on the stairs, one on each stair because there are 14 of each, maybe just placing them there completes the puzzle. I believe we are meant to climb them, Jennifer said. That might be what the scuff marks on the clocks and the shoe prints on the pillows are telling us. But Patrick, I think you're onto something. Because if we put the clocks on the stairs, there are 14 stairs and 14 clocks, and then we walk on them, we wouldn't have been violating rule number 6. We'd still be going up the stairs though, I said. Would we? Jennifer said. Or would we be going up clocks? Patrick said. When he ran a hand through his hair, it looked like he might pull some out. Semantics. But the more we talked about it, the more it made sense to us. There were still 2 other clues, the 7 clocks running in reverse and the ladder, that we weren't factoring in. But we figured they also related to that solution without us realizing it. Jennifer had pointed out that for one of the clues for the puzzle downstairs, the 19th century desk, she'd only thought about its connection after the fact. That desk had been made in the same century as the Fibonacci sequence had been coined. So we decided, and we started putting clocks down on stairs. We even used the ladder, even though someone could have just put those clocks down as they went along while being handed the clocks up from below. But maybe that was what the ladder was for, so we could put the clocks there ahead of time. Time. It was never on our minds, and the march of 14 clocks ticking in unison from the walls to the stairs wasn't much help. Jennifer volunteered to walk up those clocks because she was the lightest and said she had decent enough balance. Said she'd been pretty darn good on the balance beam once upon a time. I think Patrick or I in particular might have slid off the flimsy looking clock face coverings, if we didn't break them. They were light, plastic, circular, and easy to take off the walls. We placed each of the normal clocks on each of the first 7 stairs, and then we put the strange counterclockwise running clocks on the last 7 stairs. Our reasoning was that time had to run forward before it could run in reverse. Then Jennifer went up the circular staircase at the center of the room. She did it by stepping on the clock on each stair. We held our breath. We reminded her not to touch the railing with her hands. I don't envy her. A few times she wobbled and nearly grazed the railing. At the last stair, she waited a moment. I think we were all waiting for some sound or movement, like when the first floor puzzle had been solved. Then she tried the trap door. No dice. It would not budge. We did hear something, though. Footsteps from down the hallway. Strange, inhuman, I'd say hoof-like, but that might be a little misleading. I remembered them from downstairs, even though I hadn't been paying much attention to what they had sounded like while approaching. There was the staccato, almost dance-like rhythm, and there was more than one set. Their movement competed with the ticking of the clocks. The entities, they were approaching from the end of the hallway. We had failed the puzzle. Jennifer's expression when she looked down from the top stair, her hand still on the trapdoor latch, reminded me of the expression on that person in Edvard Munch's The Scream. I'm not much for paintings myself. That might be Greg's domain, I suppose. But I knew that one well enough, and I knew I felt the way Jennifer looked with her eyes wide and her mouth hanging. We have to escape them, I said. We just broke rule number 5, Greg said. It states that you must solve the floor puzzle. If you fail, the entities will come for you. Yeah, but, Patrick said, I broke rule number 3 and we're still here. Right, Jennifer said. We're still here. Jennifer, Patrick said. I saw his face light up, a candle in the darkness of my dread. But the entities were approaching. Seemed like they were already passing the first room, slow but inevitable. The strange dance rhythm was like the predator toying with its food. Patrick grabbed the compact extension ladder and set it up once more against the curving side of the stairway. Jennifer, he said, can you walk back down on the clocks and then get ready to go back up again? Can you do it again? Sure, but I'll explain later. No time, trust me. For myself, as I watched, feeling rather powerless, I was already worrying about a repeat of the fish door incident. Patrick had seemed so certain about which door the trap was behind. Leap of faith, Greg said. You'll either make a believer or a bleeder out of me, Pat. From the ladder, Patrick got up on the last stair at the top, nearest the trap door. He waited for Jennifer to move back to the bottom of the stairway. Okay, Patrick said. Let's use the ticking of the clocks as our beat. We'll step at the same time for each second-hand tick. Each second, together. I'll go down at exactly the same time as you go up. Then you try the trap door. Patrick, I said. I'd realized something. You're not standing on a clock. I know, he said. I don't need to. The rules don't say anything about going downstairs before you solve the puzzle. They got ready. We all counted to 3 aloud as we had before entering the house. Tick. Patrick stepped down while Jennifer stepped on a clock. Tick. Jennifer stepped up on a clock, wobbling, while Patrick stepped down on the next stair. Down and up at the same time, like the shoe prints on the pillowcases facing in opposite directions, like 2 sets of clocks moving in opposite directions. I'd been looking back and forth between them and the doorway, and I saw a strange hand, big and wide and with more than 5 fingers, reach around the opening. Unlike the living room downstairs, this was a pretty small chamber. If they got in here with us, it might be over before it began. When Patrick had gotten to the bottom of the stairway and Jennifer was at the very top, she tried the trapdoor again. It took me a moment to realize that the trapdoor had opened. When I glanced back to the doorway, that hand I'd seen was gone. Gone too were the sounds of their approach. Air rushed out of my lungs. The thing about those impossible stairs from art, Patrick said, what makes them a paradox is because they ascend and descend at the time. They appear to be going down, but then you realize they've actually been going up. Impossible. They're doing both, Jennifer said. Like time moving forward and backwards at once. Like the clocks, Greg said. Then we realized that no secret passage had opened for us going back to the main stairs. It had to be what was beyond the now open trap door. So the rest of us went up the circular staircase. We figured we'd be all right now, not in violation of Rule 6, because we'd solved this floor's puzzle. Above the trapdoor was a dark, narrow hallway. We went down that hallway. A couple of times one of us mentioned something moving in there with us, but it could have been our imaginations. We located another trapdoor down that passageway by noticing an outline of a thin square light. When we opened it up, we found ourselves above the second floor vestibule under the main stairs where we had begun. We jumped down, and we got ready for the third floor. Part 6, the third floor. Up we went. This time, I did my best not to think about Walt the Stairman while on the stairs. I certainly didn't speak of him. I didn't want a repeat of the earlier incident when I'd gotten a nasty glimpse of that particular entity. In the third floor antechamber, there were paintings of gears and other mechanical things. Their frames and glass coverings were an off-red hue, as if they'd been dipped in blood and then set out to dry. There was a bench you didn't want to sit on because of thin nails sticking out. Beside the bench was a flower pot. Instead of flowers, a fake arm and leg, the kind amputees might wear, jutted above the rim. This time there was just one door, and even though that door wasn't set with a trap, I dreaded that room more than I dreaded any other room we'd encountered yet. This was the room I might have had the big influence on. We opened the door and went inside. Dim lights displayed a room full of fish tanks, small to very large. Though the water in each tank was murky, they were lit up so well that we got a good view of their contents. There weren't any fish inside them. Instead, there were metal beams and bracing, gears, rubber belts, cords, and metal parts so twisted that their original purposes were unclear. There was a decapitated head of an animatronic squirrel character of a family entertainment center, some local knockoff Chuck E. Cheese type establishment that we used to go to but was now defunct. Rust and grime caked these objects. Since childhood, I've had a fear of submerged mechanical things. I didn't find out until later that there was an actual phobia for that. Submechanophobia, the fear of underwater man-made objects. This room had been made in an attempt to make my friends understand, to make them understand a certain fear of mine, because they had laughed at me, unable to comprehend how machines underwater could be a whole lot scarier than above it. It did not bring me any joy whatsoever to find that upon looking at the contents of this room, the design made real, my friends finally got it. I wish I hadn't been trying to prove a point back then. We knew there was a trap in there, under the floorboard, but we couldn't determine where it was. We had to step carefully. We gravitated toward the submerged head of that squirrel character animatron. His name had been Singin' Squirrel, and the family entertainment center he belonged to was called Singin' Squirrel and the Gang. As I said, a local Chuck E. Cheese knockoff that we had in our hometown and was now defunct. Why did we all go over to that particular tank? Because it had started to move. When we got closer, we could see that the nose and other plastic parts of the face had started to wear away, revealing the bone and nerve-like machinery behind it. It was all swollen, as if what was inside couldn't wait to get out of the worn plastic skin. It was moving. "Welcome, kids," it said. The animatron's voice was distorted and muffled from being submerged. When its jaws moved, bubbles went up and popped the surface of the tarnished water. Its tank gave off a smell like rotten bologna and blood. "Banjo Bear and Fiddler Ferret were just asking about ya." "Holy," Patrick was saying as he stepped up beside me. The flooring beneath Patrick broke. I grabbed him and pushed. Where the wood had been weak, something we had not been able to detect, there was another open tank just below. It too was lit up so that we could see the metal contraption down there. It was an open bear trap. It was as rusted and foul looking as everything else in those other tanks. "It's been a long, Singin' Squirrel continued in his characteristic southern drawl. "Long time since we've seen ya." He segued from that to a song, but then he got caught up on the word long, repeating it over and over until it slowed down and got very deep. Like that old record player downstairs, it started to sound demonic before it faded. Singin' Squirrel's mouth remained open. Speaking of the record player on the second floor and this incident and how they had both slowed and got demonic sounding, those were details we had left out as kids. We were beginning to find out that for the things we left a little vague in Greg's sketchbooks, the house would fill in the details for us. And we were not fans of the choices it was making, at least not when we had to encounter them in person. Patrick thanked me for pushing him out of the way of that tank-submerged bear trap beneath the flooring, and they comforted me, and I think themselves, about my fears of underwater machinery. The next room was the laboratory. In our designs, we decked it out with all kinds of vials and canisters of liquids, steaming vats, hoses that pump things here and there, forceps, spatulas, and other utensils, and ancient-looking machines that sparked electrical current and spit fire. What we saw there and there, it seemed to be a pretty faithful representation of what we'd put in Greg's sketchbook all those years ago. Except, here's one reason why I just mentioned how when we left out details, the house took certain liberties to try to fill in those details. We had put a Frankenstein's monster in that room, strapped him down to the gurney, but we had only drawn in a vague shape and written the words, "like Frankenstein's monster." When we got closer to that thing on the gurney, and we had to because we'd put it in front of the door at the end of the room, we could see all the details that the house had filled in for us. Its face and body were scorched and bloody, riddled with indentations and evidence of parts being fused on. But the kicker, it had pieces of each of us. 5 patches of face for the 5 of us, including Sally. 5 different assortments completed the patchwork of its body. But its face and body were made of the adult us. Sally's long blonde hair on the right part of its head and the right green eye of the thing gave us patches, glimpses of what Sally might look like if she were still around today. It had seemed to be unliving, but when we began to pass over the patchwork creature, it came alive. It groaned. Its right hand snatched Patrick's wrist at about the same time. He'd gotten too close. It was still strapped down to the gurney, but it took a lot for the 4 of us to get Patrick free. The strength of that thing, of only its right hand, was unreal. The right side of its crooked mouth frothed and drooled. Tears wet its eyes. It was all of us. It was none of us. When we left the room, I felt, and I think the others probably felt it too, that we left pieces of ourselves behind. Next was a dimly lit hallway, looping us back around in the direction of the stairs. Light was focused beyond, where we knew that there was a pit that we had to cross. But Patrick stopped and slumped down against a wall. He sat there with his arms over his knees and his head bent low. I went over to him. "Don't think I can do this, man," Patrick said. "I think this is where I turn back." "You got us here, buddy," I said to him. "We owe you enough for that, but we might need you for the long haul. Think about Sally." "Sally isn't a treasure," he snapped. By this time, Jennifer and Greg were next to us. "Sally's gone," Patrick said. "She's been gone for a long time and she's not coming back. And as for the treasure, for all we know, it's some monkey's paw garbage that we're going to regret getting. If we even have a shot at getting it. I'm sorry, I'm out." "We have to try," Jennifer said. "If it's us against the house, we need everybody we can get. Bonus points if they happen to be the childhood best friends who helped design it." "That's right," Greg said. He looked like he was on the verge of a bigger breakdown than Patrick was having. He grinned through it though, I think for Patrick's sake. "Besides, Pat, we've still got some questions about the property. It wouldn't look good to your real estate pals if you left us here without answering them." "Well," Patrick said. He stood up and roused himself with an ironic chuckle. "Guess the only way to answer those questions is to continue." "That's the spirit," I said, patting him on the back. "I knew you took your job more seriously than I do." "Let's go," Jennifer said. "You silly deranged kids." Another pit was before us, but we could only actually see the bottom of this one, unlike the one in the second floor library. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. At its bottom were long spikes of bamboo filled with chicken excrement. How did we know what they were filled with? Well, because that's what we had written into our sketchbook designs. Filled with chicken poo. You would have had to jump 40 feet to cross that pit. But there were ropes you could swing across with. There were a bunch. They were taut, though, and fixed to stakes in the ground. You had to trigger those traps to get access to the ropes. Leg snare traps, like the ones in the movies that catch their victims or prey in a leg noose and pull them up in the air, leaving them dangling by their feet. We had to knock over one of those stakes without getting caught in the loop of rope surrounding it. But the closer we got, the more we realized why we had to put so many leg snares into our designs. To make it more dangerous, to make it harder. By trying to knock over one, you might inadvertently knock over another stake and get caught in its trap. That's what's happened to me. It was no fault of mine or my friends. Before then, we had been able to use all of us to our advantage, as when we got across the library. Now, because the hallway was relatively narrow and there were so many stakes, there just wasn't enough room. We got bunched up and someone accidentally elbowed me. Out of instinct, I moved away. That's when the back of my shoe struck a wooden stake. The leg snare trap was triggered, and the rope tightened and brutally swung me up and over. Already I felt sick, the dim room spinning around me like I was on a poorly designed fair ride, my stomach not knowing whether to drop or to rise. My right ankle felt like it was being torn off, but even once I was upside down, dangling, blood rushing to my head, that wasn't the end of it. Something clicked above me and began to swing me back and forth over the pit. I recalled the mannequins on the previous floor and how one had a book open to 2 torture devices. Here was one of those torture devices, a leg snare that not only held you upside down, but also swung you back and forth. Something fell out of my jeans pocket, my pocket knife. The one I carry around all the time because I'm in construction and live in the South and you never know when you'll need it. I needed it then. But as far as I knew, it was at least 20 feet below me, in a pit of manure-filled bamboo spikes. My head was pulsing, and I began to see stars. Already my hands and feet were going numb. I had a coughing fit as I swung, and I'm not sure whether that was my attempt to call out to my friends or something else. They were telling me to just hang on. Yeah, I was hanging on all right, and it hurt. They sprang another trap. A rope whipped against my face. I could taste blood. Then they sprang another trap, and another. But eventually they got it right. Not an easy feat. They had to not only spring the trap, but catch its rope before it sped over the pit and was too far out of reach. Patrick was there, right side up. He put one of the free ropes in my hands. I don't know how I held on to it. It must have been scary for him to try and hold on to his rope above that pit while sawing at the noose around my leg with his tiny keychain pocket knife. I know it was scary for me. He got me free. I had a moment of extreme panic as I started to drop towards the bamboo spikes, but Patrick was able to help me, along with the other rope he'd put into my hands to get back upright. Then, both of us used our weights to swing back and forth above the pit until we had enough momentum to cross. Once there, we threw our ropes for the others to get. Thankfully, those things were pretty substantial, so it was not difficult to get them across the pit and into Jennifer's and Greg's hands. The whole ordeal was pretty rough. I feel sapped just thinking about it now. But we had to get our acts together. By we, I mean me, because that affected me the most. The puzzle room was just beyond. We opened the door to the room down the hall, which was about twice as large as the little puzzle chamber on the previous floor. We were startled by what we found. There was a table at the center of the room where the puzzle was supposed to be, made of what appeared to be gold. On this golden table were golden shapes that seemed to be part of the table itself, or cast in the same mold. These shapes were a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond. There was a heavy wooden chest in one corner of the room with a golden lock on it. Another chest of the same kind was in the opposite corner of the room with a lock on it. A series of medieval-style woven tapestries on the walls, winding all across the room, showed 4 scenes: a lopsided battle between 2 forces, a well being poisoned, crops burning, and 2 kings at a chessboard. There was also, bizarrely enough, safety equipment hanging on a rack in another corner of the room, including a large apron and a face shield. Naturally, we investigated further, and here are all the clues we gathered. The 4 tapestries on the 4 walls. The one with the battle showed an army facing a much smaller force. The second tapestry depicted a man pouring something into a well, and the third was of crops burning. In the last tapestry, one king has just defeated the other, as shown by their chessboard and the winning king's posture. However, a group of soldiers, with their swords drawn, was sneaking up behind the king that has won. A heavy wooden chest in one corner of the room was a golden lock. Another chest just like it, but without a lock. What we judged to be the puzzle itself. A golden table with golden shapes as part of its tabletop. These shapes, a circle, a triangle, a square, and a diamond, were actually part of the tabletop, not on it, as if they had been cast from the same mold. The golden table could not be moved, no matter how much we tried to push it, suggesting it might have been secured to the floor. Interestingly, we found that the tops of the shapes unscrewed. When unscrewed, the circular opening of each was about 4 inches in diameter. Inside was a pungent-smelling liquid that was very irritating, causing us to quickly screw the tops back on. Each of these golden shapes was the same height, probably about 3 feet tall, and we had judged the liquid to be about halfway to the top of each. Their other dimensions varied. We could not move the golden shapes filled with the pungent-smelling liquid, just like we could not move the table. Inside the chest, without a lock, we found an old postcard with a checkerboard design and nothing else on it. A clear box made of a very durable plastic with a golden key inside it. We could neither break the box nor fit the box inside any of the unscrewed golden shapes, and 4 pieces of chalk. These pieces of chalk were in a circle, triangle, square, and star, not diamond shape, and probably averaged about 2 to 3.5 inches in diameter. One set of protective equipment on a rack in another corner, an apron, a face shield with a respirator, and gloves. The measurements were eyeballing at guesses. We had no tools to measure with. The whole time we were trying to find out whose puzzle this was. Well, they were all of ours, but it seemed with our past puzzles that each one was connected to one of us in particular, like with Jennifer's Fibonacci sequence or Patrick's Penrose stairs. It took me a while, but thinking about their mumbo-jumbo number sequences and paradoxes, along with the clues we'd gathered in this room, jogged loose a bit of a mumbo-jumbo in my own brain. Parando's paradox, I said. Beg your pardon? Greg said, looking up from the notes he was taking. I used to play chess and checkers a lot, I said. Even back when we were making up this house. I haven't touched the stuff much after high school, but I do occasionally. Yeah, I was a bit of a geek, still am and proud of it. Some other kid would throw around this fancy term called Parando's paradox, which I guess is a way of putting when you use a losing strategy to win a game. It gets done in games like chess and checkers. There's this old story about this Chinese general that wins horse races against his king, and he does it by starting with the slowest horse. Figures the king wants to win and will use his fastest one up front, so the king wins the first round. But in the second round, the general uses his fastest horse, while at the point the king is forced to use a slower horse than his best, unless he wants to use the fatigued animal. The general wins that second match. In the final match, the general wins again because at that point, the king has used up all his fastest horses. Okay, Greg said. Interesting, but how are we going to apply that to a puzzle? Maybe we have to fail this puzzle, Jennifer said, in order to solve it. How are we supposed to do that without summoning those entities? Patrick said. Rule 5, we failed the puzzle, the entities come after us. We traded looks. Before then, I had been hoping that we wouldn't see the entities on this floor, that we would solve this puzzle the first time. Maybe I'd been hoping in vain. We put our heads together and went over the clues to the 3rd floor puzzle again. Stay tuned, everyone. Good night.